Hello, in this video we're going to talk about the nervous tissue. So let's not waste any of your time. Let's get right to it. Now, when we're talking nervous tissue, one of the things we want to point out right off the bat is that we've had a series of short videos of the various tissue. Well, that ends with this one. There's a lot to cover in the nervous tissue between the brain and the spinal cord and the receptors and the different systems, getting it to the central nervous system, getting it out from the central nervous system. So we'll just kind of hang in here. But this is by far our biggest video to date. Now, starting to look at the structure of a nervous tissue and a neuron. Excuse me. You can see the little drawing of a neuron, starting at the very top, kind of those branches coming off the yellow, the purple circle in the middle. Those are the dendrites. Dendrites are super important. I mean, they're all important, but this is what receives the signal from the previous neuron. And you can see the image coming off those little light blue kind of roller looking things with the yellow, and you can see the same thing on the other end. That's the previous neuron. But you've got your dendrites and you got your axon. You got your cell body, which is the soma, and that's where the nucleus is, that little purple. Then you've got your Schwann cells, which aren't labeled. Well, that's the greenish blue kind of roller things, plastic-looking things around the axon, which is the long rod all the way through. And then you got your axon terminals on the other end, your synaptic knob, where you're passing the information on to the next neuron, and that's the neuron, the neuroglia, as you can see there as in the text. That's the astrocyte and the oligodendrites. That's a reference to those. Those are kind of helper accessory cells. The neuron needs a lot of attention to keep it in a good shape, and the neuroglia are the kind of those helper cells that take care of all the needs of a neuron. Now, when we're talking the nervous system as part of the nervous tissue, the thing to think about right off the bat is that it's kind of a tag team event to keep everything organized, and of course this process leads right into homeostasis, which is the next video. But the getting the information properly received and get the information out to get a particular job done is kind of a tag team event, as I mentioned, and that's the endocrine system, your hypothalamus and your thalamus and your pituitary gland and all those organs that are associated with that, and the nervous system. Because not everything is a take your hand off the burner scenario. When it comes to temperature, when it comes to salt levels, sugar levels, whatever it may be, if your body senses that something is different than what it needs, then that information goes to the brain, and the brain can send a message to the hypothalamus telling it what it needs to get done. But your overall nervous system, the typically take your hand off that burner scenario. I mean, you got three things that are happening. Your sense receptors pick up on the change in stimulus that sends that to the brain, and the brain processes it and sends the signal back out as to what needs to get done. Excuse me. Now, that process of receiving, getting a signal, getting it to the brain, and getting it back out is, again, also a tag team event. It's your central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord, and your peripheral nervous system, which is all of those receptors, okay, and the pathway to get to and from those receptors. That's the peripheral nervous system. Now, even with inside of those, if you're going to be sending the signal back out from, or I should say to, the central nervous system, that's got different pathways and different names. The somatic sensory pathway, that comes from skin, muscle, bone, anything not an organ for the most part. You know, your leg gets kicked, so it sends a signal from the somatic to the brain in that pathway. Now, if it's an organ is involved, then it's called visceral sensory division. So the organ sends out a signal to the brain in the visceral category. All right, lost my step there. Lost my number there of what page I was on. So, continuing to divide up the peripheral nervous system. Now you've sent the message to the brain. Now it's going to come back from the brain. Again, if it's going to skeletal muscles, it's got a name. If it's going to organs, it's got a name. Somatic, it's what goes to the muscle, skin kind of thing. Visceral, again, is the name for going to organs. And then your last two things, your sympathetic, your parasympathetic. Sympathetic increases if something needs to be increased. If it needs to be decreased, it's parasympathetic. So if you think about the idea of somebody scaring you, or you see something that makes you nervous or whatever, you are chilly and your body needs to increase its efforts to keep you warm, that's going to be sympathetic, because you're going to raise or increase. Parasympathetic would be the opposite. Say you need to reduce your blood sugar, you need to lower something, that's going to be parasympathetic. Excuse me. All right, here's a little chart to kind of help just keep all that in play. But you can see the peripheral is where a lot of the stuff is being done, because that's outside of the brain and spinal cord. You got your peripheral now. Is it going to be sensory? Is it going to be motor? Are we coming from receptors? Are we coming from organs? Visceral, again, organs. Somatic, muscle. Visceral, motor division. Organs, somatic, muscle. So that's the take home. If you see the word visceral, you know you're involving organs. If it's somatic, you're involving muscle tissue. All right, so now again, breaking down further the structures of the neuron. We talked about the names. Now let's talk about what some ideas about them. Your soma is that yellow section of the neuron. If you think of the yellow section, you want to think of frying an egg. Frying an egg would be, the axon would be all that white part, whereas the nucleus would be the yolk of a cell. And this is what receives the information from the dendrites and then passes it along to the axon. Alright, and then your dendrites, that's the little branching things that come off of there. And there's a lot of studies that have been done with dendrites. I know we show a few here. but in actually you have many, many, many dendrites. And the more you learn, the more your brain processes, the more dendrites it'll grow. But their job is simply to receive the information from the previous neuron and pass it along through the axon to the next neuron. And this has got a lot of ways that this happens, and in the A&P class you would learn what's going on there. Excuse me. Now you're continuing to break down the neuron. Now your axon that we talked about, that's a long rod. It's got a lot of things that are going on there, and it's all listed there. You won't certainly need all of that, but in case you want to capture it. But the axon is that long rod coming off the soma. Again, transferring that message across. It's covered in Schwann cells, which is that plasticky looking stuff, and you got the spaces in between the roads of Navier as far as the name, but it's just the idea of getting that message sent across the nervous tissue from one neuron to the next. Now we covered central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and all those processes that our bodies go through. But what about an organism? You know, we mentioned jellyfish not having an exoskeleton, not having an endoskeleton. They've got something different. Well, the same thing is here for jellyfish, and sea anemones would be another one. A nerve net. I mean, they've got the sensors, the rhopalia, as you can see there, and then just around the organism is like a net of neurons as opposed to a pathway like what we have, but that's the neuron. The nerves and nerve net replaced kind of the brain and nerve cord process. Well, that's our video over neurons. We'll come back at our next time. We're talking about homeostasis and negative feedback. We'll see you then.